Hello and welcome to the BYU Family History Library webinar series. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Bryant and I'll be your host for this webinar. Please make sure your microphones and web cameras are disabled during the presentation to provide for a smooth recording. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and we can address your concerns. You're welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments and insights. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar is next week, February 3rd, Smashing Brick Walls with DNA, Finding a Revolutionary Soldier with James Baker. If you'd like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we're pleased to hear from Dr. Roger Minert, who will be giving a presentation on residential registration in Germany. Roger P. Minert received his doctoral degree from the Ohio State University in German language history and second language acquisition theory. He taught German language and history for 10 years and then became a professional family history researcher. Accredited by the Family History Library for Research in Germany and Austria, he worked for 12 years as a private genealogical researcher. From 2003 to 2019, he served as a professor of family history at Brigham Young University. The author of 167 publications, he directs the research program German Immigrants in American Church Records. The series now consists of 28 volumes. In 2019, Minert was recognized for his years of service to the Palantines to America Society and also received the Shirley Reimer Lifetime Achievement Award from the International German Genealogy Partnership. And Dr. Minert, if you're ready, we'll turn the time over to you.
Good evening. Welcome to this webinar. 2 weeks ago, we had a great experience looking at German census records. What we have this time is a similarly unknown source of records. And we might find out in certain cases that these are better than census records. So I hope you're looking forward to something new. I used to tell my students, I'm not going to write any more books on German records, but then something would come up. And of course, as a professor, I was under the endless duty to produce new literature. I was told, clear back in my grad students' days, find a gap in the literature and fill it with scholastic work of high quality. I was blessed to do that with the census book. And shortly after that, remembered another kind of great record that I'm going to share with you this evening, and was blessed with the time and capabilities and money to make a book on that topic. So I was wrong when I said the census book is my last. By the way, I will be sharing with Bryant a PDF with all of the notes, the handouts for this, so you don't need to be busily scribbling away while you're trying to watch the screen and listen to the information. You'll get all that. That'll all be available tomorrow. Well, let's consider this scenario. We're working on our ancestry in St. Louis, and we find a great church marriage record, Philip Jakob Fassbender. In it, it says that he comes from Speyer, Rhine-Bayern. Now, if you're experienced in this, you'll know that Rhine-Bayern is the 19th century term for that part of Bavaria that lies west of the Rhine River. It's separated by a couple hundred miles from the Munich kind of Bavaria. So we went to the records, and fortunately the Family History Library has microfilms, now digital versions, of the three main churches in Speyer: Catholic, Protestant, and Reformed, or we could say Catholic Lutheran and Reformed Lutheran. So we got in there and we looked for our man, and he was nowhere to be found. We couldn't get him in a baptismal record. I looked in confirmations. Those are the events that occur when young people are 13 to 15 years old. He wasn't there. He didn't marry. Now you're thinking, wait a second, he's marrying in St. Louis. But the record in St. Louis didn't indicate that he was a widower or divorced. So I looked there anyway. He wasn't there. So I turned to the civil birth and marriage records, Now, civil registry started in Germany in 1876, but in the Rhineland, and this was part of the Rhineland in those old days, to the left of the Rhine River, they had him back in the 1790s. Well, he wasn't there either. Now I'm in sort of a bind. Is the St. Louis record wrong? Has somebody made a mistake? Well, couldn't find him anywhere in Speyer. Then we came across this record. PH in almost every case is Philip. It could be Philemon, but that's rare. Fassbinder, as you know, with the phonetics of German and English, we can change E and I quite legitimately. A scribe came to Speyer from Rohrbach, 15 miles southwest of Speyer, and left town. This is wonderful. So he was not a native of Speyer. And sure enough, we go to Rohrbach and we find him. Now, what is this record? You can see here, Fassbinder, P.H. Jakob, Scribent is from the Latin writer from Rohrbach. Now, this is where he was most recently. Okay, turns out to be his birthplace. Von hier weggezogen, moved away from here. Well, that's nice, because this is an 1839 record. That gives him 5 years to make his way to St. Louis, fall in love, and get married there. So this fits chronologically just right. Back in 1960, the Genealogical Society of Utah filmed this. These are records of the comings and goings of newcomers, itinerant laborers, and eventually every person in Speyer. That'll be about 60 years later. Right now on this list are only newcomers. The official term of residential registration in German is Einwohnermeldewesen. Einwohner for resident or inhabitant, melden to report. Wesen is just system. The office in each city hall where the work is done is called the Einwohnermeldeamt. Amt is office. Nowadays, everybody in these 3 countries is required by law to register if they, let's say that person, stays more than 90 days in one place. As you know, you're a tourist for 90 days without requirements of registering anywhere. But if you're in one place for 90 days, a student for that matter, then you are required by law to register. You go to the Einwohnermeldeamt in the city administration. So go to City Hall, you show your passport, and you tell them what you're doing there, what's your birth date, your birthplace, where did you come there from. So if you came there from Milwaukee, you'd indicate your address in Milwaukee and your birth date. So then you're an official resident. Now, I learned about this when I first lived in Germany in 1971. And here's a picture showing me in my glory days. I was privileged to serve for 4 months as a tour guide in the Palace of Herrenchiemsee. If you've been in that gorgeous building, raise your hand. Oh, of course, I can't see your hand, but you're participating now. And I have a claim to fame. I gave English tours on Saturday and German tours from Tuesday through Friday. It was my honor then to become the very first non-German to give German language tours in the building. I've been back many times. It's a gorgeous memory in my life. Here I am signing in. I came into Herrenchiemsee from Brigham City, Utah. There's my birth date. Schlossführer means palace tour guide. All the stamps, of course, that make this official. If you've been there, by the way, the palace is located on an island surrounded by the Chiemsee Lake, halfway between Munich and Salzburg. So now when you depart, you go back to the very same office, you show the certificate they gave you the first time, and you sign out by saying where you're going next. So we have me coming from one place to Chiemsee and then leaving to the same place in this case. And this goes so far, if you live in one town and change residence inside the town, you go to the same office. In Koblenz, I actually moved from one apartment 3 houses down the street. And that required me to go back downtown and tell them, well, instead of Emserstraße 35, I'm going to Emserstraße 43. We don't have this in the United States, as you know. So here I am leaving Chiemsee at the end of my 4 months living on the island. And it says I'm going to be a student when I get back to the USA. I've kept all of these. In fact, I've done this 13 different times in 10 different cities, 9 times in different cities, and 4 times in Vienna. I've kept all the papers. And it was a great thing because I'm going to use that personal experience to come up with a new topic to write about. I use this to solve problems for clients. I was thinking, well, I had to sign in. What if they signed in the 1880s or the 1850s in a certain town? Could I find this kind of document there? And of course, you remember I had 8 major questions in the census study that guided my research and writing. In which German states were these records kept? When did they begin? What kind of content? Now your eyes are starting to get bigger, or maybe you're starting to think, wow, this could be fabulous. Do they exist? And of course, your most important question, how do we gain access to existing records? So as I look at those questions, my interest gets more intense with each additional question. Würzburg residential registration. Würzburg is a marvelous Baroque city in South Germany, beautiful, beautiful city. I was studying the life of this man, Alfred Joseph Ferdinand Jodl, who was the 3rd highest ranking member of the military in Germany throughout World War II. So I found out from other historical records who his father was and who his mother was. Well, so I wrote to the city of Würzburg because, as I indicate at the bottom there, I'd learned to my chagrin that despite the fact that most records of churches in Germany survived the war, these did not in the Catholic churches of Würzburg. So I wrote about his mother, and they sent me back this gorgeous record, Theresia Baumgartner, born in Hofkirchen on 10 September 1861, Catholic, and she arrived here on 1 August 1889 from München. She's coming from Munich. So now I know where she was before, and if I wanted to pursue this, I'd write to Munich and say, I have her arriving in Würzburg on 1 August 1889 from München. Can you give me a copy of her record there? It goes beyond this. It says she's a housekeeper employed by Captain Jodl of the Bavarian Army. And of course, I could get information about his military service from the Bavarian Military Archive. But this is interesting. 4 different children are ascribed to her. All 4 of those are illegitimate children. And the birth dates are given here. And here's the one who becomes Colonel General Alfred Jodl, born 10 May 1890 here, and he's illegitimate. So these 2 people did get married in the next place where they lived. So, by the way, this is funny. It says, housekeeper by Captain Jodl, a concubine. That's a little bit of a judgmental statement. I don't believe she walked in and said, I'm a concubine, but the recorder put that down. What a marvelous document. So much detail on 1 page, more than a census record would ever give. Well, what kind of foreigners were registered? This is a fun picture of a bunch of ne'er-do-wells, misfits, lowlifes, losers, unreliable persons, people for whom you ought to have a good, healthy respect and fear, for that matter. So first focus, single man. Laborers, journeymen, beggars. Watch out for the sick and afflicted. Gamesmen, con men. This is fun about musicians. But these are people who could easily be fly-by-night. And if they're fly-by-night, their purpose for being here might not be righteous. On top of that, Muslims and Jews, Muslims were rare in Europe in those days, not respected, not loved. Jews, of course, had their own problem as ne'er-do-wells in German society, from the pogroms of the early years to the persecutions of the 19th and 20th centuries. So these were people that the normal populace, the regular populace, was told to beware of. Now, I did my master's thesis on the socio-critical songs of Reinhard May. He was a minstrel still alive today at 80-some years old. And he wrote wonderful stories criticizing hypocrites and rotten neighbors and doctors who weren't proficient, and politicians, of course, everybody working in City Hall. He took pot shots of it in the funniest way. And so he would perform with nothing more than a microphone and a guitar to music he had composed, to poems he'd written. So he writes about Musikanten sind in der Stadt. Musicians are in town. This is a terrible thing. Misdeeds, crimes, excesses. So he, in his 4 verses, he say, get all of your animals into the barn, lock your gates, don't open the door, because these musicians are going through town. They'll steal anything they possibly can. And of course, get your daughters out of sight too. That's really important. This is a disaster. Everybody should be on their guard. So the refrain for 3 verses. Erbarmen, Musikanten sind in der Stadt. Heaven help us. This is worse than a tornado. This is worse than a fire. Now, Reinhard May, in his typical funny way, turns the whole thing around in the last refrain. Erbarmen oder lass mich mit ihnen ziehen. You're laughing if you know German. Heaven help us, or let me go to the next town with them. Let me join in their excesses. So typical Reinhard May, making fun of something that is truly historical. I mean, this is real that he's talking about. Okay, laws, rules, regulations. We looked at lots of laws last week when we discussed the census book. So we're dealing with 38 states. Once again, I have concentrated my research efforts on Germany since Napoleon, since 1815, when the map was redrawn, and we were down to 40, 39, 38 states. And it's interesting how many of the laws I found referred to previous regulations and chastised officials for not doing what they were told to do. And sure enough, from Shirley Reamer, our beloved departed Blumenbaum editor for so many years, she found this marvelous picture of a not diligent guard at the city gates. Now, for those of you who've had the privilege of being in Germany, remember that every major city and many, many smaller cities had the core of the city surrounded by a wall. The only way to get in was through specific gates. The gates were always guarded. This man is supposed to check the papers of anybody he doesn't know. He knows everybody in town, but anybody else, he will stop and in some cases turn away. 1812, this is a wonderful printed in Fraktur document, but you can get this translated, that was sent to every city in Hessen in the Grand Duchy, capital of Darmstadt. And sure enough, it makes reference to 2 specifically dated communiques in the 3 years prior to the release of this one. And it says, not only are we doing what we told you on these dates, we're doing more, and we need to do it better. This was posted in Hamburg. What a marvelous piece, a very large piece that was to be posted anywhere newcomers were known to meet, which means in all the boarding houses, the hostels, the cafes, bars, more than anything. And in Hamburg, of course, they have even greater problems because these people aren't just coming through the city gates, they're coming into the port. These people don't just speak German, they speak every language on the globe. So the Hamburg police office is watching very carefully to make sure the people are identified and found to be worthy of staying there. We showed you this map a couple weeks ago. The tremendous confusion, more than 100 German states in 1648. In a matter of a week, even a person on foot could cross 2 or 3 borders. So they had to have some kind of identification, and they were carefully monitored. Here's a Wanderbuch. In the middle, I indicate here it's an ID and an employment record of a journeyman. This happens to be a cobbler from Switzerland. He is described in these words here about his height, weight, stature, color of hair, color of eyes, does he have specific scars, etc. Anything necessary to identify him. He signed it down below too, Frauchi Johann Jakob, and he is a cobbler. Everywhere he goes, he'll show this first. which means he's a legitimate person there for a righteous purpose, a legal purpose. And when he's done working for the local cobbler master, that master will sign the book and say, this man has good deportment, he does quality work, I recommend him to any other master in our trade. Initial procedures. Newcomers had to report to the police, we should say actually to the city government, within 24 hours. The town officials registered strangers and foreigners. By the way, these are not the police who come out and arrest you for crimes. Police, the word police comes from polizei, which means policy. The regulation, if the regulations are people regulating, that's what the people in town hall do. So now nobody was supposed to allow these people an overnight opportunity or employment unless they showed proof that they had registered downtown. Employers, innkeepers, and family members had to ask for the papers. So if a man came in and said, I need to stay overnight, I'm going to be staying here for a few days, the innkeeper would say, show me your permit from the city, or I don't let you take a bed in my establishment. Police kept the stranger's personal documents. So they would have taken from Johann Jakob Trautschi his Wanderbuch and issued him a statement saying, this man has proven his identification to our satisfaction. He may seek lodging and employment in our town. Now, I wonder if any of you remember, way back in the old days, it's hardly done anymore. But I remember that my first night in a hotel in 1971, they asked for my passport, and I thought, wait a second, federal government tells me never to let my passport out of my hands. But they said, you don't stay in our hotel unless we have your passport. Well, when I checked out a couple mornings later, they could first have sent somebody up to the room to see if I was stealing anything or damaged any property before they gave me my passport back. Put your hand up if you ever had this experience. Shirley Reamer did. In fact, she actually left one time in a rental car, forgot her passport, and had to drive back a couple hours to get it. Travelers who did not comply could be fined, jailed, or simply thrown out of town. Worse yet, if an employer was caught employing somebody who didn't have the permit, or the innkeeper was caught by somebody having a meal in his inn, had been there for 3 days without the paper, they could be fined. In other words, this is serious business. These regulations are very important and they're carefully executed. Could you be evicted? Absolutely. You commit crimes, do anything, break societal standards. If you're a loud and crazy member of one church and reviling the other church, problems between faiths, you can be tossed out. Of course, if you have a disease, you're out on your nose instantly. So, and the regulations indicate you're to be tossed across the border, right back where you came from, or at the closest border to another state. Well, this goes back to in Heidelberg to the 12th century. When I wrote to them, they said, well, we were doing this in the 1165 or something. So Heidelberg is a university city, and of course would be attracting some pretty bad people. University was 1388 or so, but it was big enough before that time to attract some people of good or poor repute. Prussia had 7 provinces in 1817, so they represent maybe 1/3. No, let's make it more like 1/4, 1/5 of the German territory, and all over that territory, records of newcomers were required by city governments. 1842, Lübeck, port city, we mentioned like Hamburg, they had bigger problems than Frankfurt and Stuttgart, the interior cities. We'll look at the 1842 Lübeck laws better in a second. Now, because every state is doing this, and that's what we found out with the census records, where previously people thought, well, some states might have done census records. We found out that every state did. And by 1851, there's a 14-state accord signed in Gotha by representatives who came from 13 other states. And this says that they will all issue passports to their own citizens, which allows for their more regulated control there when they go outside of their state to one of the other 37 states of the empire, of the of the country that will become an empire. In 1851, there's no Germany. There's simply 38 German language states. So what did the law require? In Württemberg, one of our favorite places to research, the town hall officials kept alphabetical lists. So if you were to write to them, you could say, well, I'm looking for Gerhard Heinrich Minert. They'll look at the M's. Oh, we have a Minert here, as early as 1807. Now, look what happens in Lübeck. This is interesting. They had something like 16 different kinds of registries, of which I'll mention 4. All persons coming and going. And they kept a summary. That's great. A list of all persons simply passing through. So if they were there for one night, they got a certificate saying, I'm here for one night, from the 12th of October to the 13th of October, and that was it. Everyone giving permission to work. With that permit, you can go to the local cobbler and say, I'm a journeyman, here's my book showing my previous 2 years of employment, great record, please hire me. And a list of persons to whom new passports were issued. These are people in Lübeck who wanted to travel to one of the 37 other states in the German language territory there. And of course, all vagabonds are criminals, and the list was only kept to show that we tossed them out of our fair city. What details were recorded? Name, age, birth date, hometown, previous residence, status, occupation, whether they had personal ID, family members are employed. This is great stuff. And you're already recognizing several items here are not in a census record. Previous residence is not in a census record. So Anmeldung, Abmeldung, which you will do today if you live someplace for more than 30 days or 90 days. Okay, increased vigilance, single females. Now, in 1808, it was terribly dangerous for any female to travel alone. But toward the middle of the century, with industrialization, more females are moving along the country roads there to factories and places where they can get off the farm, or maybe get away from a failed liaison in their hometown and go to a different place. And in some cases, men with a wagon, all their belongings piled in the wagon, and 6 or 8 family members and a couple of employees traveling as a company. And citizens from other towns in the same state. We didn't have that earlier, only from different states. But now, from Hessen, from one town in Hessen to the next town in Hessen, they're watching for you. The final expansion, everybody, including anybody, as I indicated, where I moved in Koblenz from one apartment to another, everybody's included. So you talk to your German friends today, they'll say, oh, sure. If we move from one place to another, we go downtown, we tell them where we went. Now, when they expanded this to include everybody, in some cases, the city officials went out and did sort of a census. They did a residential registration for every single dwelling. By 1900, essentially every town, every place in the German Empire has the system. Now, national registration. In 1867, we had an expanded North German League. There's no Germany yet till 70. But by that time, about 80%, 85% of Germany was in this North German League. And in order to make life easier for each other mutually, the states, they established a law that said that if you're in one of the North German League states, you can travel to any other the League states and set up residence and start a business because you'll come there with official documentation from your hometown. 1871, the German Empire is established, and this freedom of movement goes for all 38 states. So they carried that on. Now, there's a little bit of confusion between the 1938 census and residential registration. The 1935 laws, very sad legislation coming out of Nuremberg, deprived all Jews of their German citizenship. Every Jew, 600,000 living in Germany at the time, was overnight no longer a citizen, which means they're strangers. And they have to be watched very carefully because that's how you treat strangers. You watch them carefully and you write their names down. In 2000, revisions by state or national government were carried through. Most of those required the transition of the written or typed records into computerization, which means now if you say, well, I'm moving from München to Dresden, the registrar who signs you out can then shoot an email onto Dresden and say, look for this guy, he said he's coming there. Well, look at the marvelous types of records. This is 1825 in Berlin. And I put a red arrow indicating Geburtsort und Provinz. Now, if you know your German, birthplace and province. So look at all these marvelous things here. We have the age in years coming from a whole bunch of different places to the big city Berlin as early as 1825. So now we can track them back to Magdeburg, back to Grambo in Pommern, Güstrow, Mecklenburg, Wittenberg, and Brandenburg. This is what the books look like, Stargard, 1830. This is in the part of Pomerania now in Poland, back in 1830, a special book for this. Wernigerode, this is between Leipzig and Magdeburg in the modern state of Sachsen-Anhalt, 1844. Previous dwelling. I hope you can see that yellow arrow better than I can. Where were you before? And these are all their hometowns. Now, most of these you can find with these in Meyer's Gazetteer. Otherwise, they would have modified them. In some cases, they have given you states because they thought you might not recognize the town by its own name. If somebody says Boston, we know where it is. San Francisco, we know where it is. But if they say Livingston, where in the United States is Livingston? These people in the city of Peine, near Hanover, 1853. The columns from left to right, given name, surname, status, occupation, and what we like best of all, where were you before you came here? Once again, census records never ask for this. So these beat census records in that regard, in many regards, and some better examples are coming up. This is the best of all. I've loved this. I lived in Darmstadt for my first experience in Germany in 1971, fell in love with the city immediately, terribly destroyed in World War II, but what's left, I fell in love with. So, Heinrich Meiser, coming from Leisel in the county of Alsfeld, he is a citizen of Hessen. He works for the railroad. Here's his birth date in 1820. Here's his death date in 1889. But look at this. He married in 1863. Census never says that. Here's his wife, who is a native of Darmstadt. She's Catholic. Catholics in Darmstadt are very rare. Born 1822, dies in 1905. Oh, she dies in the Krankenhaus, in the hospital. So, but it gets better. Here are two children born to them, baptized. Well, their religion is Catholic. That fits our expectation because of the mother's affiliation. But then he dies in 89. Look at this. On the back of this page, from 89 to 1905, when she dies, she has what, 15 different locations? Every time she changed her apartment in Darmstadt, she went downtown and said, I'm moving to Gardisenstrasse 28. Mr. Kramer is my landlord. Can you get anything, can you imagine anything better than this? In fact, this right here beats a church record in its content, in its quantity. Okay, this is what the city used in many cases in the Rhine province. So everywhere in Prussia, you'd find this. You'd go in and say, here's where I am, here's my ID, and here's name, status, birthplace, birth date, and religion, etc. They fill this out, and then they cut this off. I have to get one of those fun little icons that shows the scissors cutting this off. They filled this out and handed it to the man and said, now show this to anybody where you want to stay overnight. Get yourself a bed and breakfast, or if you want to be employed, show this to anybody. This is your license to stay in our city. When you went back, they filled out another one. They took this away from you and gave you another one to take to the next city saying, he was here and he minded his P's and Q's. Leipzig. Now, everybody in Leipzig by 1886 has to sign this. Every one of these people was born in Leipzig. Here's a mother, born in 46 with her children, 78, 9, 81, 84. She's probably a widow. Here's another one. Now I listed ABC because 3 town names. And by this time, your jaw is probably scraping on the floor thinking, I gotta have my hands on one of these for my family. A shows the birthplace. Column B shows the previous residence, if different from the birthplace. Now, in some cases, it's not. Where are you moving to in column C? So now we can start in Schalksmühle, go backward to, oh, this is great. Father, mother, and child, all born in 3 different places. Good heavens. Think of the effort this would save you. How to locate these. Now we get to the most important part. If it's 100 years old, that page, that card, should have been transferred from the Einwohnermeldeamt, where they produced it, to the Stadtarchiv, City Archive. This is exactly the same procedure as we talked about 2 weeks ago in the census presentation. Over 100 years old, it's beyond the privacy restrictions. So once it's transferred to the Stadtarchiv, anybody can see it. Now, if you go to the Einwohnermeldeamt and say, my grandfather lived here in Darmstadt in 1935, they'll say, sorry, privacy restrictions, you can't have it. Unless you can satisfy them by showing them your family tree and a picture of your grandfather in Darmstadt in front of the big lion monument or something like that for World War II, pardon me, then they might say, okay, we believe that and you showed us your the death certificate of your grandfather, we'll give you the copy. But once they go to the Stadtarchiv, no restrictions. You can see anything and copy it. Now, if you move up to the county archive and to the state archive, province, call it what you want, or the national archive, you get lesser and lesser probabilities that you can find these records. These are local records. They need to be kept locally. In fact, really the only time you'll see them in the Kreisarchiv, the county archive, is if the Stadtarchiv runs out of room for some reason, or they're renovating something and they need a temporary location for the records. That's about the only time they'll pass them to the Kreisarchiv, the county archive. So we're going to write always straight to the Stadtarchiv to ask for these records. Now you remember we have this wonderful formula. Any town name in Germany, www, and DE will get the official site, not a Wikipedia site. So I could put Darmstadt in there, Berlin, Heidelberg, whatever you want. And then you're looking for this Einwohnermeldeamt, and you write to them and say, my great-grandfather left there in 1890. They might write back and say, we've transferred those records to the Stadtarchiv. So, or you can write straight to the Stadtarchiv and say, my great-great-grandfather left there in 1890. Would you please provide me a record, any copies of records that deal with him? Oh, ask for the census at the same time, in the same email. Now, in some cases, they'll connect you from the Stadtarchiv right to the online Findbuch, and you can see Finder's Book, the catalog, and you type in Einwohner, just that word, and you might come up with digitized thing. Now, these are secondary and tertiary records, so most of these will not be scanned and available for you to see in the internet, but they have them in many, many cases. I don't think I've ever written to a place where I didn't get them. So, oh, wait a second, I did last February. I wrote to a place very close to the Minert hometown, and they said they haven't preserved them. So now, anytime they're to the Stadtarchiv, you will be paying for their services. Even if this is a direct ancestor, I can't imagine they'll give you that for free. So, but please, in my book on this topic, just like in the census book, I give you sample letters in German and English. You can fill in the blanks with the correct information regarding your ancestor and send those off. Be prepared to pay the fees for that, usually fairly nominal, $25 for a good document for that matter. In fact, I got about 50 documents for $37. They made 50 scans and charged me $37. And of course, check the family history library. Now use all these kinds of words, strangers, foreigners, I should put strangers in their housing lists, city directories, immigration, emigration, other keywords. So pump all those words in there. I hired Jeline Maines to search the catalog for me. The mistress of the family history catalog, she knows everything about it. She came up with a whole bunch of these as we did our pre-Germany communication research, finding these. And of course, Ancestry might have some. You have to look into the place name there and see what types of documents Ancestry has in the place names. I don't believe I've ever seen these in Ancestry. Ancestry's operation has these records on a lower level of focus. Now, final comment, then we go to all your questions. These documents are as easy or as hard to find as census records and far less common than church records, but they could be more common than census records. Nevertheless, they're superb and well worth the effort and cost of searching for them. Now, so I produced a book on this topic, German Residential Records for Genealogists, published 2.5 years ago. You can get that from the publisher. That'll come up here in a second. Okay, so back in September 2017, I made this statement, this claim. I'm never going to write another book on Germanic genealogical research. Of course, German immigrants and American church records will go on as long as possible, but I've kept my word in 2 years. I haven't produced another book, haven't got one planned either, but if I do, I'll be quick to share it with you. That's not a very good scan of the front cover of the book, but it shows some travelers, and it even shows an entry into the city, if you can see that carefully over here. So go to FamilyRootsPublishing.com or simply go to my website where I can give you a $3 or $4 discount on that. Trying to help you out, keep your costs down. Now, please remember, in the collected works that has 121 of my books and articles in full text PDFs, these 2 books are not there. These and my other books that are on the market still, I'm not allowed to give away. You can imagine what the publisher would do if I put these books into a $49 product of collected works. No, but as soon as, and in fact, today we took 3 books that are now available digitally and can't be purchased. We put them into collected works. So, well, anyway, that's just to keep you informed, because one person wrote to me a couple of weeks ago and said, is the census book in collected works? No, it's not. Can't do that. So there's so now this is goofy. Yesterday or 2 days, I couldn't get into my website with the rogerpminert.com, but I got in, some friends told me, go to, this is so long, I'm going to leave this on the screen during our questions, RPM, let's see, GRT Publications at Wix site. I got it in that way, and today we got it corrected. My web manager and a friend of mine who was a previous web manager got it corrected, so it actually works for me. But if rogerpminert.com doesn't work for you, please write this long one down. So, Brian, we're back to you for questions. And how do I get back to you? How do I turn this back to you?
Perfect. Thanks so much. We can leave. You can keep sharing your screen, Dr. Minert, for a little bit so people can use that website if they like. The first question is from Natalie. It says, can you find immigrants that are leaving from Bremen to the U.S.?
That's a possibility. Now, you're talking about one of the tear-jerking stories of German family history, the willful destruction, the programmatic destruction of Bremen ship records. However, if the person stayed there long enough, let's say 3 months, in order to earn enough money to pay the ship passage, the Bremen city offices should have a residential record for that person. Now, if they're just cruising through, they walk into town, go right to the docks, pay their passage, they won't be in those records. But that's a great question. That's something that is more promising in Bremen than anything else. Might actually help you bridge that terrible gap of the missing Bremen passenger lists. Thanks for bringing that up. That's a great question.
Great. And the next question is from Carolyn, and it says, what records are available to search 1687 through 1800 in Württemberg?
You'd go about that the same way. Now, in Württemberg, we have the church records. Almost every one of them survived and is digitally available through Family Search. Starting in 1808, family books, which make that the finest province in all of Germany to do research in. But before 1808, church records, and clear back to the 1600s, write to the town, write to the city, to ask if they kept those records. Stuttgart would have for sure. And bigger cities like Ulm, Tübingen, Heilbronn, they probably had those way, way back. But this is like census records. It grows over time. And the larger the city gets, the more strangers will be attracted to it, and the more they see the need to monitor the movements of those strangers. So write to any town. I would go back to the 1600s for sure. I might be disappointed for small towns. But what does it cost to ask? The answer will come back without a cost. That might say, we're sorry, but our system started in 1810, something like that. Next question.
Yeah, Dennis asks, are these, I think it's in reference to your books, are these still available for places that were in Germany but are now in Poland?
Yes, my books, all of my work is done based on the German Empire. These are the geographic boundaries of the greatest extent Germany ever was. So, as you may know, the Family History Library catalogs all German records by the German Empire dates of 1871 to 1918. That goes way into modern Poland and in East Prussia, a little tiny corner of Russia today. Yes, a huge portion. More than half of today's Poland was Germany, and I deal with every one of those in these two books because that's Germany at the time. And yes, the archives in Poland keep very carefully and are better at cataloging than ever before all German documents in their possession, because international law, I think we mentioned this 2 weeks ago, states that any document that was produced in town X must go to an archive in the country where town X is today. So the Polish didn't just ship all the German records into Germany. No, they've got millions of pages in Polish archives today. Next question.
Yeah, it looks like we have a couple people that are asking for specific places that it's available. Barbara asks, does this also apply to Luxembourg? And Domenico asks, are these records available for Mecklenburg? And if so, what are the years?
Right, Mecklenburg, of course, is part of the German Empire, so they certainly did it in all the major cities in Mecklenburg and probably every city by 1900. Luxembourg, I'd be surprised if they didn't, because as I indicated, Switzerland, Austria, good heavens, the Austrians were really tight on this stuff. So I'd be surprised if you couldn't write to a Luxembourg town and get a positive answer on something. Whether they have your people or not, I'd expect them to write back and say, we have such records, but unfortunately we cannot find the person you named in those records. So, and by the way, if you write to them, whatever your answer is, please send that on to me, to RPM, let's see, Roger P. Minert at gmail.com. I want to know. And if you ever find this, if you find a census record successfully, or one of these successfully, please send it to me. I want to see this. I want to rejoice in your success. I want to know that these ideas are helping you. They've helped me a lot. Next question.
All right, so the next question says, so does the book give the timeframes for these records by state?
Yes, just like in the census book, I treat all 38 states separately, listing all the laws I could find about these and showing what the laws required. Then, if I have images, I think I have an image from every one of these states. I can't imagine. Well, it's possible I don't. Haven't gone through that book in the last few weeks, but I treat every one of the 38 states separately.
Awesome. And Sylvia asks, how big did a town have to be to keep in I can't say that, but
Einwohnermeldeamt, yes.
Yes.
Big enough to attract too many people for everyone to know. So if you went into a market town, of course, is going to attract people from towns around there on the big market days. But even then, most people would recognize people. But the bigger the town, the more important it is to track the movements of strangers. Good heavens. Could you have an easy time trying to find somebody in New York City today? I don't know how the police could ever find somebody in that place. So as soon as the town got large enough where people were saying, hey, we got a bunch of strangers here. What are these guys all doing here? And a couple of ladies, why are they here? Are they up to no good? At that point, either the state would say, you guys have got to start keeping records, or the town itself would say, well, Stuttgart does it. Let's go find out how they do it. Let's start doing it here in Großgartach, because we got a problem with foreigners. So once again, over time, the bigger the city gets, the more they'll have a need to monitor strangers. Next.
All right, we can take one more question, and it's from Helen. It says, what about towns in Alsace-Lorraine? Alsace-Lorraine.
In Alsace-Lorraine, you know, I've got the book in hand here, and I'm going to go in here and see what I've said about that. Bremen, Alsace-Lorraine. Okay, 1815, that's what I got here. 1826, documented that they were doing that. I've got two examples. These are actually in French from this town. 1808, good heavens. 1808 in Strasbourg. Of course, Strasbourg is the capital city, the biggest one. They'll start it first. But 1870, right, I've got, you know, some really nice images there. So yes, Alsace-Lorraine was one of the 38. They called it an imperial city or an imperial state of the empire. So that's a chapter in the book as well.
Great. Awesome. So thanks everyone for all your questions. And let me just share my screen.
Thank you, Brian, for hosting this event.
Of course. All right. We hope you're able to join us for our webinar next week on February 3rd, next Wednesday, Smashing Brick Walls with DNA, Finding a Revolutionary Soldier. And that'll be with James Baker. And as always, our webinar will be uploaded within the next couple of days on our website shown here and on our YouTube channel. And so be sure to check our website for any handouts that will be uploaded with the video as well. So thanks everyone for joining us, and we hope you have a great day.
Brian, can I still answer chats?
Sure, yeah.
Because I've got there are questions here I can answer right now.
Okay.
Okay, the census webinar can be seen. Brian can hook you up through the BYU library, right, Brian? You can go look at the census one we did 2 weeks ago.
Yep, it's posted on our website, which is shown right here.
Okay, now somebody asked, what if all you know is Württemberg? That's not going to work. You've got to know a town or at least a county, because Württemberg had, I think, 7,000 towns. There's no way you can write to a state archive and get any help. They'll write back and say, name us a town, and well, they'll say, write directly to the town. So just knowing Hessen or Rhine-Provinz is not good enough. Let's see, it's on YouTube. What if you only know? We did that one. And then, oh, thanks from Australia. What about Prussia? Prussia consists of 13 provinces. Those are 13 of the 38 states. Each Prussian province has a chapter in the book. Now, obviously, Prussian legislation is going to be similar for all of those, but the last Prussian states came in 1866. So I have all kinds of stuff on Hanover, for example, and Hessen-Nassau before 1866, when they were independent states, not part of Prussia. So yes, I've covered every inch of Prussia, including the parts now in Poland. Okay, once again, if they're in Poland, we need to know, were they in Silesia, were they in Brandenburg, West Prussia, East Prussia, or Posen? We need to know a town. But what I've got here will help you in that area. The census book actually has a Polish letter you can write. I don't know if I put a Polish letter in this residential registration book or not, but there is a chapter on writing to archives. Well, there it is. Writing to archives in Germany, France, and Poland. So I did that in the residential registration book as well. So you can take those standard letters, plug in your names and places and dates, and send them off. Most of them in emails. Perleberg, yes, that's out there in, is that in Brandenburg? Anyway, for Perleberg, Natalie, go looking in Myers, where you can find the province. So to get the discount on my book, go to my website, rogerpminert.com, and scroll down from the first page down past a bunch of different books, and you'll see the 6 books that I can sell to you at a discount. So yeah, save any money you can. Last but not least, remember, all proceeds from my books and presentations go straight to German immigrants and American church records to keep that program rolling. By the way, we're moving into Kansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Texas. Kansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Texas. If you know of a church there, please write to me and say this is a German church in that state, and we will go after them, after the records. Anything else?
Oh, looks like there's one more question if you want to answer that.
Oh, great. I'm still here. You bet.
Perfect. Yeah, it says, what is the name of the book where Polish towns are listed?
Okay, both the census book and the Polish towns, Myers Gazetteer, Meyers. In fact, the website is great. meyersgaz.org. I'm going into my other computer to pull that up really fast. I never look at it because, of course, I use it all the time. If I can get where's my cursor on here? I lost him. There it is. Okay, the website is meyersgaz.org. That's 1912, so it has every tiny town in the entire German Empire, 1912. That's the publication date. So that's our Bible for place names, county names, province names. And if it existed at all and you got the right spelling, it's in Myers. I'm in Myers every single day. Maybe you could type that in there, Bryant, for us.
Yeah, I think I put it in already. It's Meyers.
Well, right, the second, yeah, after the oops. That's the correct one. You don't have to capitalize the M. But this is something every researcher has got to know about because you'll use it constantly.
Awesome. Well, if that is all the questions, then thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you. Auf Wiedersehen.
Yeah, we hope everyone has a great day and see you next time.